Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to Retro Reviews. So, if you've been following us week to week, you know that we've been covering the Rocky films, and we finally made it to the one we really didn't want to make it to. Last week, obviously, we had Rocky 4, had a great time talking about that one, and we're going to have a great time talking about this one too. But it is Rocky 5, and whenever you say Rocky 5, it's just like a charged statement. You can come down on either side of Rocky 5. It's usually regarded as the weakest one. But we're going to get in deep into it. It's going to be a spoiler-filled discussion, and we're going to dissect this thing. We're going to discuss it beginning to end, and find a conclusion, whether we appreciate elements of Rocky 5 or whether we completely disregard it. So it's going to be a fun discussion. And as always, we want you guys to comment along as well. We're going to get onto the socials in just a second. It's going to give you enough time to jump on before we start the discussion properly. So like, comment, share, subscribe, and over to George for the rest of the social.
Definitely. It's all about that algorithm. So we've had a lot of new people checking with us over the weekend. Thanks to those that checked out the Lovers Rock review and, of course, The Mandalorian. Picked up some new subs, so glad you all enjoyed that. If you do like the Rocky films, apologies you've had to come to this one. We do have Rocky Balboa next week. We did have Rocky 4 last week, which was the anniversary, which we're going to unofficially say we knew. Either way, the best way to find out when we're going live or when we've got pre-scheduled videos going up is finding us on Facebook, Cinema Savvy, and Twitter at Cinema_Savvy. We've both been a bit more active in using those socials now, so you see a bit more posts from us, a couple more gifts, cool stuff like that. So do check that out, and we do, of course, have a link to TeePublic in the description below. But yesterday is all about Rocky 5. We've loved everyone commenting, so if you do check in, do comment your thoughts on this one, because this is the one, as we've said, that's going to split people. And jumping in right to the beginning, it was interesting because this is only the second time I've ever seen this film today. Now, I've seen Rocky 4 multiple times, Rocky 1 multiple times, 2 and 3, and Balboa, a couple, Creeds, we'll get to them another time. But Rocky 5's that, like, when I first watched it, it's because I was watching them all for the first time. And at the time, I didn't know it was deemed as the bad one. It was in that era where I'd recently discovered people didn't like the Star Wars prequels, so it was very new to me, people hating on things. And I remember watching Rocky 5, I was like, oh, there's no boxing match at the end? Like, this is really crap. Like, as someone that didn't know anything about it, I was expecting the final fight to be Rocky versus Tommy Gunn. We'll get to all that stuff later on. But, yeah, we got the street fight. And I was kind of really worried to go back with Spoke. I didn't watch it yesterday. I saw it today, so it's still pretty fresh in my mind. But to be fair, it was better than I remember it being at times. It was
at times, that's key.
Yeah,
times.
The key word is at times, because it you know, there's some not to sort of sum up the film, but there's some really good stuff in here at times. And then the next scene will happen, you're like, oh bloody hell. Like, why? And then it goes back to something half decent, like, oh, okay. And then it's like, Christ again, why? So a lot of question marks. Question marks is probably a really good one for this, but I don't know if you're the same as me on this one. You've probably seen it way more than I have.
Whenever I'm doing a marathon, it's always part of it, so I can't avoid it as much as I want to sometimes. No, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I think there are definitely some redeeming factors about this film. I like some of the directions it was trying to take. I don't think it sticks the landing on the majority of them, and we'll get onto this later. There is actually a quote-unquote director's cut version out there. A work print version is probably more accurate, which is more closer to what the director and I think probably what the writer, Stallone's original vision was for it. And it's much more darker, and it goes into some really, really grim details, and just, you know, it feels like a much different film to the version that we ended up getting as the theatrical version. As this is, yeah, it's a real mixed bag. It's exactly what you said. You know, one scene will be fantastic. We'll get onto it later, like the Mickey flashback, where you really get that sense of heart again, and those emotional scenes, which maybe Rocky 3 and to a greater extent 4 had sort of took themselves away from. We talked about how we love Rocky 3 and 4, but they are the very cartoony ones. The whole essence of this film, and you can tell even from the director like John G. Avildsen, the director of the first Rocky, it's kind of amusing that he ended up directing the best Rocky film and also kind of the worst as well. The whole essence of this film is the back to basics approach, and you get that pretty much from relatively the beginning of the film. This need to take it back to Philadelphia, the same familiar streets, the same outfit, you know, the fedora and the leather coat and everything, walking the streets of Philadelphia. So there's a whole sense of that, and I think that comes from the fact that this was meant to be the final Rocky film. There is definitely a sense at the end of conclusion, everything coming full circle. Even the credits of the film, for God's sake, show like a collage of all the previous Rocky films leading to Rocky 5. In the original ending, Rocky was meant to die at the end of this film. The very final shot was meant to be him dying in Adrian's arms. I'm glad they didn't go with that ending. So there are some good things, and I appreciate that it is trying to get it back to the roots of the first one more, but it doesn't capture that same essence. It doesn't capture that rawness, and any attempt that it tries to do, it's also peppered with some very, very silly and incredibly 90s things as well. So it's almost trying to have its cake and eat it too. It's trying to be what Rocky 1 was, but you still have more of those comedic elements, especially when we get the likes of George Washington Duke in there. And as such, you kind of get this weird mishmash of a film that doesn't really know what it wants to be. And it doesn't fall one side of like a Rocky 4 where it's completely comical and over the top and you love it. And it doesn't fall on completely on that, raw emotional drama side. So it's a conflicting of emotions. I do think it's the weakest one, though. It's been a while since I've seen Balboa. I know Balboa goes really into that emotion, though. But I think this is justified in it being the worst one. But as like one of the worst films of all time, Razzie Awards for this, that, it's nowhere near that. The poster's a different story, though. And you have the story of that where you were trying to do the thumbnail and you were like, oh, God, I don't want to talk about Rocky 5 and I've got to do the poster and the poster's terrible and everything about Rocky 5's terrible. So yeah, it's weird. It's a weird mishmash, this film.
Yeah, and that's a really good thing with that post because its reputation is of that. And when films have terrible reputations, I mean, let's talk the prequels really quickly because we love them, we grew up with them. You can look at things around them. Phenomenal soundtracks, beautiful posters. This is Star Wars. The trailers are incredible. All those surrounding factors, and it's that set in the cinema type thing where for some people it went away. And obviously we've had time. I mean, this is only a couple of years younger than this. But with this, it's got that reputation, and then the posters are awful compared to the other ones. And I can't talk about the marketing. I wasn't born. I haven't seen the trailers, but everything about this feels different. They want it to be different from the previous ones they've had, but by being different, they're then also choosing in the same film to go back to basics. So it was an interesting approach, and to round off Rocky as a character, it was actually the right thing to do to send him back to Philadelphia to have that closure. Now we have time as an ally. We know they've done Balboa. We know they've done the 2 Creed films as well. And we kind of spoke when watching them that ultimately to get into later on, like you can't have the ones that come after without this. There is a place for it. It is the weakest of the set. But unfortunately, maybe Balboa and the Creed films can't be as good if you didn't have Rocky moving home to Philadelphia. If you didn't have those small moments that have that impact. And again, it's that it wants to do something really good and then it just goes about in a different way. Just look at that image above me, guys. Like, it doesn't even look like Sylvester Stallone. It looks like he's getting ready to like do a remake of La La Land. I mean, I'd rather watch it with Stallone than what we got, but it was one of those where it's very bizarre. But I guess the warning signs there, we love, as I said, we love 3 and 4, but I guess there are warning signs that if you go, you can reach that limit, and they got it perfectly in those. But when he is trying to bring it back, I mean, if the Fast and Furious 9 came out, it's like, sorry, we're not going to space now. We're actually just going to go back to stealing vans off the motorway. Everyone would be like, but why? And that's the question. So it's an interesting discussion on this. But I think the big thing with this, we kind of spoke about going back to basics, is ultimately where the story kind of, we can talk about how it kicks off and how it quickly changes. But there is a time gap, which you know far better than I do. But it is almost impossible for someone to tell me this is set in the same year or 2 as Rocky 4. Even forgetting that, we get a montage of Tommy Gunn being like 36 or 20. He's in the 20s. All that happened in the space of a year. Like, was the man fighting like every 2 weeks?
That's what I was thinking when I was watching as well. Yeah, I don't know what the recovery period is between fights, even if you don't take much of a beating, but it would definitely equate to way more than a year, I think.
And that's why I don't sit here, look at the Rocky films thinking, I need this to be realistic, but for the Rocky films take me out of that, even when it's had that, look at a Rocky 4, he kills Apollo Creed, okay, on Christmas I'm going to go to Russia and fight them. That wasn't a one-day prep. This is like every week there's another fight, there's another build-up, and I'm not here to moan on little things like that because normally films can get away with it for me. But it was just, to me, a bit too jarring. It was a bit quick. And there are some things that happened which I really did not like, which I guess we can get into. But the main core of that is being so close after Rocky 4 you're setting something, and I'll let you talk about what you messaged me actually, because that was really good the way you kind of explained it could have and should have been, because Sage Stallone as well. We'll get to that later because I love his own section, but again, he's aged 6 years in like a month.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely mad. So the Rocky films, now from my mind, I thought all the Rocky films took place directly afterwards, and I guess Rocky 2 does take place directly after Rocky 1, but then after that you do get more like a few years in between. You have the years in between Rocky 2 and 3 as he continues his streak as world heavyweight champion. You even get some time between 3 and 4 as well. This one picks up immediately after 4, and actually I do kind of like the framing device of this film in that the fight with Drago messed him up so much. Like, he really took a beating from that it does have a lasting impact. Well, at least a lasting impact for this film. It's kind of goes, this is how all the Rocky films goes. He gets this like really life-threatening injury from his boxing, whether it's his eye or his brain damage or whatever, and then it just goes away by the next film. So we've come to expect that. But I really do like that scene where he's in the locker room in the showers afterwards, and he's got the shakes and Adrian comes to comfort him. That's a really dark opening, and we haven't seen him really have much of an effect, like a mental effect after a boxing fight. But judging by the pounds of pressure per square inch that Ivan Drago was delivering, then you definitely would have something after that fight. So I like that. And although that was filmed, so Rocky 5 came out 5 years after Rocky 4. And they are noticeably older, like the main core cast. They definitely look 5 years older than they were in Rocky 4. My problem is immediately after that, where we continue that and they fly back from Russia to Philadelphia. And we're introduced to Sage Stallone, who is obviously meant to be Robert, the same kid from the first one. And I did some digging. The kid from Rocky 4 was 9 years old. I was close with my estimation. He was 9 years old, the actor who played him, who played Robert in 4. Sage Stallone was 14 when he did Rocky 5. And it's just, you're right. Not everything has to be in place, but there has to be some consistency. And that is the one. I can still watch Rocky 5 and I can still find enjoyment of it, but there is always that lingering thing. Like, why did this have to? You can't tell me that this is still set in the 80s. This is not a mid-80s film at all, like down to the soundtrack, down to the look. You've got, I was just having a look at some of the artists on this soundtrack. Yeah, exactly. Like the mullets and everything. MC Hammer, 783, all of these like hip-hop songs, which was all completely 90s stuff. This is a 90s film through and through, and it feels 90s. I don't know why they couldn't have just had that framing device at the beginning to continue after Rocky 4 and then do like a 5 years later time jump and then continue the events of this film. Could have easily have done that. But I get, Stallone, he's writing this thing. He probably wants to get his son into the limelight. So there would have been that element there. And I don't know. I'm guessing Stallone pretty much would have vetoed that if they were casting anyone else or bringing the same kid back. That being said, I don't think the kid would have the acting chops to do what the kid does in this, what Sage Stallone manages to do with this. And also the story inherently isn't like a 9-year-old, 10-year-old kid story. It is that coming of age story with, his son, and he's not devoting the time to his son, he's devoting it to Tommy Gunn. And there's this teen angst going on. And that wouldn't have worked with the same kid. And you couldn't have told the story that you did with this if you had that same actor. So it's a lose-lose situation, really. But
yeah, it's actually quite sad actually when I was watching this. I don't know if I messaged you, but the Sage Stallone, because obviously we know he passed away a couple of years ago, and obviously I guess this is more of like a random tangent with it, but there are some, as I said, some of the scene have these really good moments. There's some really nice scenes between the two of them. There's some terrible scenes between of each of them, but there's a really good scene when they're together near the end and they're like really killing it. And I thought, as someone that also knows he passed away, that was actually really sad to watch, because you do get these moments where you can tell that's Stallone not talking as an actor, that's him talking to his son, it feels at times. And you've got these really nice moments, and obviously it's that sort of real life tragedy that sort of followed from it. So it had, like I said, not saying that's a good thing at all, but you have these moments where it does make you think, and it is that sort of shared limelight type thing. We've had Will and Jaden Smith try it in many films, but Sage Stallone, he wasn't. He reminded me of the kid from Terminator 2, and I've never really been. It's that like it's like that early teenager vibe. Again, 90s. It is that 90s vibe as well, that 90s attitude. Like the kids beating him up at the playground, so he batters one, and then they're sat in the lounge as mates. Stuff that's funny because it never happens. It doesn't happen, but it's just funny still because it's that concept of it. But it was. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, it's obvious where it's going to go. Obviously, we didn't think it'd be a street fight the first time I saw it. However, the moment they tee up, oh, the son's going to struggle moving home. Oh, look, here's someone, albeit about 10 years older, to basically have the competition for his son. And, we know the whole point of it is going to be really obvious what happens as it goes on. But I thought it was just really detrimental to the character of Rocky himself. And this is where I feel quite sad of this, because I've always kind of said that these films mirror where Stallone's at with his life. That's how I've always felt when we've done each of these previous reviews. And in this one, it's the sort of shooing away his son. And I kind of watched this. Obviously, I don't know Stallone's real life history and stuff, but the character of Rocky wouldn't do that. I know he's done it and his writing is doing it, but to me, the character of Rocky would not do it. And I know ultimately he has the realization the way it could call, but again, with the with time going by, not a fault of this film, when he hands over the shorts, that really stung. Now, whether or not I'm going to rewatch the Creed soon, whether or not it's because I know that he ends up fighting again in later films, or that because we get Creed, he wears them, it's such a symbolic thing in the Creed films. So Tommy Gunn wearing these, and I know that's the point of it, is meant to get that reaction out of you because you're meant to dislike Tommy Gunn, you're meant to see it coming. But I hate using words like this. You know what I'm like. I've been so tolerant with Star Wars. I feel like this betrays the character of Rocky, and I never say things like that normally. And I think that's why this one stings a bit, because there's some really good stuff with him. Like you said, the brain injury at the start, we haven't seen things like that. There's an emotional connection there. It's this person we've seen it for the last few weeks, but to many people, it's been well over a decade since they've been growing up with the character or seeing it over the years. And you start off great, and then it just delves into like, I can't see him doing this. It just didn't work. It's just not real for me.
Yeah, no, I'm exactly the same. And watching it again did kind of reaffirm that for me. Rocky is not well written in this film, which is weird because Stallone is writing the screenplay for this thing. It feels wildly out of character for him, massively out of character for him. And you're right, it doesn't feel like the Rocky we know. Like, he wouldn't act like that, and it feels like he's having to be dumbed down that way and sort of like play dumb and not realize that he's not spending time with his son just to serve the story, rather than being something intrinsically linked to the character and taking the character in a believable direction. That being said, there are elements that I do like to it, and the theme that, Rocky he physically can't fight now. What does he do? And even in the structure of the films, you have the nice self-contained first movie. The second film, he becomes heavyweight champion. The third film, he has to fight the toughest opponent he's ever fought. The fourth film, he loses his best friend and has to fight an even tougher opponent. You can't keep doing that. You can't keep building that. Like, what's he going to fight? Like someone who's even tougher than Ivan Drago in the 90s, in this next film. Like, there's no way that you can do that. So I do admire the film for going with this more managerial role. That we get the great scene, which we'll talk about later with Mickey, where he knows that he can't manage, and he's almost trying to be like that Mickey figure, but he also feels weak himself. I guess if you want another Star Wars comparison, I guess it's sort of like Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi with Yoda, and that he's trying to be this thing that he doesn't think he can be. And he's living his life, which he pretty much states throughout all the movie, that he's living his life through someone else's eyes. Earlier in the film, he mentions that when he spends time with his son, it's like he gets to live another life. And he kind of has that with Tommy Gunn, where Tommy Gunn is starting his career. He's a fresh fighter. He's making all these victories. He's becoming heavyweight champion of the world. And Rocky is getting to live those glory days through him. And that's why he's spending so much time with him. So I do like the concept of that. And I do like the theme of that more sort of teacher role, because that is a natural progression for a lot of sportsmen. They would go into something like that. But I don't, it's to do with the son, like completely disregarding his son for the sake of that drama and that angst. And I didn't find that stuff interesting in the film. Even Sage Stallone, like, I think he plays it well, but just how the character's written, he does come across as very annoying, very bratty. Yeah. And yeah, like every time he was on screen, it's just, I don't need this. I don't like this stuff. But so much of that is the runtime of Rocky V, and that's where the frustrating thing is. Like, I like a lot of the themes and the concept and things that have been set up, but it's the writing, and it's exactly as you said, like, it's not a believable. Rocky wouldn't act like that. And we've seen 4 films of him now. We know how he operates. We know what kind of person he is. And he'd never turn his back on his family. Like, his family would always come number one. And that's not the case in this film.
Yeah, and I think that's what sticks out, that they build up this conflict of the son versus the adopted son, and there's not even a payoff for it, because I don't know why. This goes down to how I've seen it. For some reason, I thought that Stallone's son ends up punching him or fighting him as well. Obviously, that was actually the other school kid. My memories mixed up. But it was that really obvious vibe that they're building up so obviously for them to like not get on because of the jealousy stuff. And it got to the point where the characters say it about 5-6 times. Adrian or Paulie will say it too, and it's just boring because we know it's coming. And there is a great scene where they build up to Rocky being betrayed as such with the world championship. I all to you, and it's not. But it's the Stallone stuff with his son, and it doesn't feel right. And there's a really good drama in there somewhere. This rich kid. It's like not Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but he's gone from sort of the Hollywood Hills to the streets of Philly. There's a story in there somewhere, and he's got to adapt, and he's struggling with his dad. But the focus of it shifts too much, and even more so on Tom McGunn, because it's so obvious. It's like a charge ride from the moment. It's like, oh, you can stay in the basement. And it's like, what? And yeah, it's annoying because it's so much of the runtime, and it's what we know these films are capable of. But you made a good point that you can't go past Drago. It needs to be something different, and you can take that drama again. We've got a couple of comments from Henok, who's obviously mentioned a couple of things where Stallone sort of criticised the film in real life. Always find it strange when they criticise him in real life. There's nothing wrong doing it, but it's like you still devoted your time to that. But I think it reminds me a lot of Indiana Jones 4, because you had the gap from the third, obviously a bigger gap from Indiana Jones 3 to the fourth one. And what, 19, was it 19 years or something like that? 18 years?
So 89 and then 2008, wasn't it? So someone can do the math on that.
19 there. So obviously this is only 6 years. However, what comes after Indiana Jones 4? The fifth one that's still not out. And it's what, 2023 or 2 they're saying? That'd be like a 15-year
They keep delaying it, don't they? Delaying it.
Yeah, and whereas Rocky gets Balboa 16 years later, from this. This America release is 1991 in the UK. And it goes back to that, I don't want to retire the character with this. And it is a this, because there's some similarities there. You get it with some franchises, and that's exactly why, obviously, we'll discuss Balboa next week. We'll actually probably bring this up again. But you can understand why Rocky 5 has left that sour touch, but it's kind of a great thing looking forward as they were able to rebuild that character legacy, because if it went out on a whimper like this, it would have been really sad for the franchise. I don't think it would have that. I mean, it would still have the status it has, but it wouldn't have that sort of, especially today with the Creed films, New Generation, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously they took ideas from this in Rocky Balboa and in the Creed films, and they made it work even better. Obviously we'll discuss them in the next couple of weeks, but I think that there's something there when Stallone's sort of, doesn't want to talk about it, doesn't want to do anything with it. We mentioned previously, you mentioned the director's cut. We spoke about the Rocky 4 director's cut. It's a lockdown project. Me and you've both kind of said that the obvious thing would have been Rocky 5, but you can only imagine him having to go through the edit process of a film with his, not only the fact it's his son that passed away, but it's when he was like a kid as well. And it's all about that parentage and issues as a parent. So it's a really tricky one, in honesty. But some things are worth the time. I know I've kind of waffled on that, but some things are worth it, some aren't. But it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, no, and the director's cut, I mean, I've never seen it. I wish I could have watched it before this. It's in really low quality. I don't know if it's still available to find on the internet. Maybe, I mean, torrenting or whatever. Maybe you can find it on something like that. Maybe there's a website dedicated to it. It is something that I'd like to check out just to see that extra footage and the different tone of what it could be. It is still very much a work print, though. Like, I do want to stress that it's not like this cleaned up, glossy director's cut, this hidden gem of a film. It's very sort of like hodgepodge together, but it sort of gives a vision as to what it could be. Other characters we can talk about as well, like the whole Paulie situation. So this is like sort of like the beginning of the film, the crux of the film, which gets us so it was like a rags to riches, and now it's sort of like flipping it on its head, the riches to rags things, where Paulie has signed power of attorney over to their lawyer, and he's basically lost them all the money post Rocky 4. I don't remember when they say, was it before they went to Russia or something?
Before they went to Russia, yeah.
Would you keep Paulie around in your life if he did that? If he lost all your money? Like, again, like there's no sort of, there's no closure to that either. Paulie doesn't really get much to do in this film, and the stuff that he feels exactly the same. He feels like a character without any growth. There's no moment where he apologizes to Rocky or Adrian, or he breaks down and says, like, I'm sorry for how I've been all these years, like I've completely ruined you guys' lives. There's no moments like that, and I don't know why Rocky and Adrian, I know his family, and I know they probably think like, well, what would he do? But in that situation, I don't think I'd be as lenient as Rocky and Adrian. So the Paulie thing's kind of frustrating, and it really is just like this really dumb thing just to get us back to Philadelphia. It is literally just a plot, it serves as a plot point to get us there. I do actually really like Adrian in this film, though. She gets some really, really great moments in this film, again, being that really, really great spousal figure where she is always there offering support to Rocky, and kind of like Rocky 4 as well, where in that film she was like, you can't win, like she's just witnessed Apollo Creed's wife become a widow. You get her, she wants the best for Rocky. She doesn't want to see him die. She doesn't want to see him fight again or put his health at any more risk. She wants him to be there, and I think Talia Shah absolutely knocks it out of the park in this one, and the last Rocky film that she's in as well, because obviously she dies in between this and Balboa.
Yeah, and I like the fact she had more to do because it is quite absent, especially in 3 and 4. There were small moments of it, but never really enough. And it is when Rocky becomes that sort of cartoon, that unbeatable figure. Mm-hmm. It does lose the need for her for a little bit, but bringing her back to reality in this with the family angle as well, I really like that. And Paulie, it's a good point you mentioned because it's quick. It's like, who's the easy excuse to get him to lose his money? Paulie, easy. And it's sad because what starts the street fight is Paulie getting knocked out. And I love that scene in a really nice way. That is a great Paulie moment. There's not been many of them for a couple of films, but the fact he's willing to stand up in front of Rocky, in front of this boxer, and just give him the lip he's wanted to do for ages. You know exactly he's going to get punched when he starts talking, but is that something Paulie would do? But it's that amazing moment. I know it's jumping too far ahead when like Stallone like looks down and like the music intensifies as he turns his head and looks up. Like it's like sort of Anakin Skywalker type music thing, but it's just so. It felt they probably knew when they were writing this was stupid because they didn't just say you signed a power of attorney. It's like, oh, and the lawyers have done this. Oh, and this has this and this to this to this, and it's like, okay, you've explained it 8 times. Just do it once. We know it's not great, but by explaining it more and more, it makes you look like you know it's bad. So you want to keep talking to make it sound work.
Yeah, convince yourself.
And just getting back to Philadelphia. Even Rocky could have had a retirement in Philadelphia. I get the point of this film is that he's lost all his money and he's it's the 2 places he had left, but it's still not that wouldn't happen. Like not to bring in the real life side of things. That's why Rocky would never. He'd reclaim the money. They always do. That aside, because this is fictional, it to me just felt like an excuse. I didn't mind Paulie for it because I'd rather it was him getting that rather than like this Adrian. You've got a big drama coming out of something as sort of tragic as money. So I'm happy for him to gloss over it because I know where they're going. But again, I see Rocky 5 as the sacrifice for the ones that come after. But yeah, it's nice we get more Adrian. As I said, it's the final film. I'm kind of actually a bit nervous to watch Balboa next week, I'm not going to lie. So I'm kind of excited, politely put it in a really nice way to watch that. But the Paulie nature of it's weird. It felt better than, again, Paulie had a little bit more to do than the other films. He's still got his one-liners, but it felt again more like Stone, like, hey, look at me, I'm a good guy. My family members cost me all my money, so I'm not going to throw him out. He can still live with us. It's that like overly nice Rocky dynamic, but then it's the same Rocky that like throws his son away for Tommy Gunn.
Yeah. And I guess that's a good segue to talk about Tommy Gunn himself. So played by real life boxer Tommy Morrison. This is probably one of my criticisms of this film as well. I just don't think Tommy Gunn's an interesting character.
No.
He doesn't have the personality of like a Clubber Lang or Apollo Creed or even Ivan Drago. Like Ivan Drago didn't have many lines, but he had that physically imposing force. Tommy Gunn's just kind of, again, he's that plot point. He's just there to drive that wedge between Rocky and his son, and it seems like that's the only. I don't buy how quickly Rocky accepts him into the home. I don't buy their banter together. He doesn't have that presence. He doesn't have that commanding presence. Now he's a big guy. Like obviously he's a real life boxer. He's a really big burly guy. That the shots as well that you see in the montage, you feel it's when he like bounces them off the rope and then like catches them with a punch. It almost feels like it's bringing wrestling into boxing a little bit as well. But just him as a character. I don't really like. And they even call him a robot in the film. Like, he is just this puppet essentially by the promoters and by the machine that is the boxing sport. The character that is much more interesting in this film, and this is my takeaway from this, is George Washington Duke. I need to bring up the name of the actor here. George Washington Duke. Richard Gant. He's been in a few films I've seen, but he is easily the best thing in this film. He has the best lines, the best one-liners. He's the most entertaining. He looks like he's actually having some fun with the material. And he almost looks like the one carryover from the kind of Rocky 3, Rocky 4 style of filmmaking, that more cartoony caricature kind of thing. I believe you checked it before. He's based off of real-life boxing promoter. Was it Don King, was it?
Don King, yeah.
That fast
it's
talking.
the crazy hair, fast talking. Yeah. It's the kind of like Muhammad Ali, but now he's promoting it instead. Like Don King was like the legend of that. That I didn't know until you said it, and then you Google the name, pops up. Oh yeah, I remember the name. He is wonderful. I have every time, and he felt like one of those Rocky 4 characters, the ridiculous cartoon villain who is you want more of him. And I said to you before we hit live, I would love him as Palpatine. Like you can picture like Luke fighting the Emperor at the end. And he's, like 1 minute he's covering the camera, then he's not, and then he is, and he's just incredible. This film needs him. I think he adds a bit of life to it. As I said, I love Rocky 1. It's the best of the lot for me, and it is a drama. But when you reach this point, you can't go from Rocky 4 to a drama. You need to have little injections of what Rocky. Same how Rocky 3 got that cartoon and it injected the cartoon at times. This guy lives and breathes this, and he's wonderful. But I can't say the same for Tommy Gunn. The worst thing is for me is that as a massive fan of wrestling, the name Billy Gunn has been around for like 20 plus years for me. So it's always really hard to have, look, it's Tommy Gunn. And he's just so dislikable. I mean, I know he's a real life boxer. This makes sound like an absolute moron. In this film, it looks like he's got more of a wrestler's build than a boxer. Now that might be my sports knowledge being wrong or whatnot, but it's just, he's not likable from the get-go. He's trouble from the get-go, and you know where it's going to go. And there's nothing in that actor that conveys, like, Apollo Creed and Drago look like boxers, feel like boxers. Mr. T is Mr. T, but there is a boxer in there. But this guy, I know it's ironic because he was a real boxer, but I just didn't get it fighting in the ring. The fights felt too easy, too obvious. He's going to win everyone he gets involved, and then this character is meant to have this it's the only villain where throughout the entire film, he's got emotional connection to Rocky. I think that's a really big thing. Whereas the villain's always been, we'll save you till the end. You'll have your moments, but you're not going to actually like befriend him and then turn into the villain. And none of it works. I really struggled with him, and I just don't think the pair of them had any good chemistry with each other as well. When they're in scenes together, it feels really forced and quite tragic. Granted, like not everyone can sort of do that. And again, he was a real boxer, which makes it harder for him to act, but I didn't like him in this. Where the story is going. It's a story that's been done a million times. The apprentice ends up, going to the other side. He falls for the money. He doesn't focus on the matches, and it all goes wrong. And for what it leads to, like the street fight, epitomizes his character. I think. I'd rather not see him in the ring again. Just have a street fight, get it done with. I loved the press conference at the end. That felt very real. Not that they would actually have 20 of them stand up and say, "You don't deserve a title." That'd never happen. But I just like this moment where, he gets that dose of reality that, he realizes that it is all a scam. And then he's like, wait, this guy's not match fit after all. And I've just knocked him out. And it's just so predictable. It doesn't feel like it's so, these Rocky characters are like wrestlers. You said it as well. Drago, the silent, deadly giant, the KPI punch that can, end a man's life. He kills Apollo Creed. Apollo Creed, the quick talking one. He is like he's in the first two films. Then you get Mr. T, who is like the personal insult guy, and he's quick talking, he's quick but he's ruthless. And Tommy Gunn's like, I'm not going to speak about.
Oh, have we lost George again? He usually comes back. Oh, there we go. Sorry. I don't know what always happens on the evening.
Yeah, it's always
one time.
Yeah, but he doesn't have anything the other Rocky characters have. He's not quotable. He's not got that style. He's not got that sort of, not comic book villain type thing, but he's not got the personality to go with himself as a fighter. Like if you were playing a boxing game like Fight Night, you would want Rocky, you'd want Drago, you'd want Apollo Creed, you'd want Creed Jr., you'd want Drago Jr., you'd want Clubber Lang. You wouldn't want Tommy Gunn. Who's going to play with him? Like,
Yeah.
you want someone to deserve to be on that screen, and unfortunately, it's just not there. It's just a missed opportunity, and him being the emotional crux of the film, the betrayal, it just doesn't do anything for me, and it feels like a real waste.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there was some satisfaction in those other Rocky films to see Drago be beat or Clubber Lang be beat, or even to some extent Apollo Creed be beaten. Like when they're both trying to like climb up to the rope in at the end of Rocky 2, you were kind of hoping that Rocky would win. This one with the street fight, the Tommy Gunn stuff, I actually do really like the street fight, and I actually think that Rocky gets one of my favorite lines in the film where he's like, "My ring's outside." I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's a cool line. I do like the fight. I think they actually got, can't remember which wrestler it was, but I know that they had the help of a wrestler who helped choreograph the fight for them.
It felt, there's spine busters, there's German suplexes. Yeah. It's very wrestling, and it ends with him getting pushed into a bus ultimately, doesn't it? So
yeah. And I do really like the street fight, and I'm actually glad that it doesn't end in the ring again. It is something different that this film's trying to do, and I do appreciate it for that. But you don't really get much sort of relief or catharsis when Tommy Gunn's beaten. Where you do get that catharsis is where George Washington Duke gets his comeuppance at the end. And again, that he's more the villain for me. And if he wasn't in this film, or if he was played by anyone different or a different personality type, this film would be dead in the water for me. He is the one thing that I can latch onto this film where I can go, he is truly great. He is one of my favorite Rocky characters. He has so many great lines, like the bit at the end as well, where he's like, touch me and I'll sue, or just the bit where he's talking to, there's that other fighter, Kane. Is it Kane? Is that his name?
Yeah, he like pipes up in the car.
Yeah, and he's like, listen to me. You're going to fight who I tell you, when I tell you, and how I tell you. It's just, he's so great. The goddamn, only in America. Pretty much all my favorite moments of this film or favorite lines are pretty much from him. And he's so great. I really want that coat as well. Stallone, if you're watching this by any chance, I know that you've been upgrading your store. You're getting new items on there. You've got the fedora. You've got the jogging. I want the George Washington Duke coat. Get on that. It's like this ultimate like furry pimp coat. It's amazing. What else can we talk about this film? I mean, we're already on to final thoughts. Is there anything else to cover in this, do you think?
I'm going to talk about not really my favorite scene, but my favorite moments. It's really small. It's minuscule. It's when Rocky puts the glasses on Adrian.
That's
it's just because I'm a bit of a sucker with the first two films and how they are. And again, she doesn't have much doing 3 and 4, and they go back to Philadelphia, and he's found the glasses. And I don't know. I really like that. That melted my heart a little bit. I won't lie. It was really funny seeing him back in his like leather jacket and fedora because I've seen again the future ones where he wears them a lot. I kind of forgot that it was a big thing. He hadn't worn them really since Rocky 2. And he was like, "Look at me, I'm back." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess you didn't wear them recently." The fedora has become a bit of a thing now, isn't it? Like it's all over Facebook advertising. But that was a really small moment, more so than scene, I guess, that I've just enjoyed watching. It felt nice for the characters. It was that great little moment, and it's just going to make it more devastating next week when we get to it. But
I know. That's next week though. I've got a whole week to recuperate for that. But and yeah, kind of going with that as well, like the member bearers and everything. That was tastefully done. I liked seeing the priest back again. Where he always asks, "Can you throw down a blessing?" And he's like, "In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti." Like, I love that part. I love that character as well. What else can I say? Oh, the Mickey scene. Do you want to talk about the Mickey scene? Love that scene. Now, that's meant to take place before the fight from Rocky 1. I don't know if Mickey is the kind of character at that point to say stuff like, "I love you, Rock," and things like that. So that might seem a bit overly sappy for the character. He was always like, enough of this sappy talk. We got work to do, Rock. Like, he'd always be down to business, but it's a nice scene. I don't know if this was Burgess Meredith's final film. I expect it probably would be getting up there, yeah. It's nice that they included it. I always imagine how weird it must have been for viewers watching the film where it's got the opening credits at the start and it's got Burgess Meredith. You'd be like, what? That's what
I thought. I forgot he was in it, and Burgess was like, wait. I was like, have I got them mixed up? Like, have I got? I always get they get the names mixed up, but Paulie's Burt Young, and for years for some reason I thought Burt Young was thingy Bob Mick. So I was like, have I missed something again? But then you get the flash. It's a great little scene, but it's right. There's a couple things that I love. I was like, what? Like, I love the cufflink bit, and I love a lot of that conversation. But it feels like again, like Stallone putting in that like personal touch. Like that's what he wants Mick's last thing to be. Granted, it might have been nearer Rocky 3, but certainly not pre Rocky 1 when it was already a hassle for him to take him on board. But it was a nice little scene. It was nice going back to that gym, and we mentioned taking to its roots, but the Mick thing I liked. I like going back to that gym. It was a really nice touch. They needed it as well. You needed for him to become the mentor. It made more sense to bring in Mick for this, if that makes sense to him, because he's not even really spoken about in the fourth one.
Yeah, and it's I like that theme as well in the film. There's a moment where they're walking around Philadelphia and they talk about how everything's sort of falling apart, everything, how they remember it is completely changed. Buildings are dilapidated, places have closed down. You go to the gym as well and it's all covered with dust and there's a few like boxing gloves still on the floor. That's probably my favorite scene in the film, and that did tug at the heartstrings. You've got the music again, Bill Conti returning, this time with the music. It is, but yeah, Bill Conti. And it's those nice familiar sounds that you've heard, those slow piano pieces that really tug at the heartstrings. So it's scenes like that where I can't come down like thunder on Rocky V, because there is some good moments in there, and there are moments that you can stack up against some of the most emotional moments of the franchise. It just doesn't come together as a whole for me. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I know there's a lot more of those moments in the director's cut. There's moments where they play up the whole angle of Rocky coming back to Philadelphia and what that means to his personal image and what everyone else must think to see this guy go from the streets of Philadelphia to this great champion to then come back home, like how that must be, and his personal image. He goes into, he gets drunk in the bar, he's smoking, he's getting into bad habits. And they really play that up more, I think. There's even meant to be a cameo. I haven't seen this scene of Little Marie from the first Rocky film where it reveals that she's become a prostitute and she's homeless on the streets. Now, granted, that didn't make it into the theatrical film, and we'll get her character returning in the next film properly, canonically, I guess, in the Rocky franchise with Rocky Balboa. And even like Mickey was meant to appear as a ghost, which was later turned into a flashback, I think, at the end during the fight. It was almost meant to be like Force Ghost Mickey standing on top of the train tracks, shouting down at Rock, and that. I
feel like I heard in that street fight, someone says something right at the beginning, and it sounds like Mick. I was like, I don't know, I'm hearing this, but it sounded like someone probably chucked in an audio cue from an old film, like. It reminded me of that Spider-Man 1 scene, like, you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. It felt like something, especially when he just starts battering all the locals. But I thought I sensed something. I'll have to have a listen to that again. I'm not going to watch the whole film again, but I'd try and do that because it definitely sounds like you can hear Mick's voice near the end. Yeah, and it cuts to those flashbacks, doesn't it? It goes back to that quote from earlier where he's like, "Get up, you son of a bitch, because Mickey loves you." And it's a nice moment. You get the Gonna Fly Now fanfare kick in as well. I didn't mention this in Rocky 3 when we talked about that, but it comes up again in this movie. The Rocky fanfare is an actual in-universe song. It's played by marching bands when he returns to the press conference, and I think it's in Rocky 3 as well. That was weird, and I didn't mention that in Rocky 3, but it comes back again in this one. And yeah, I mean, then we get to the ending, and originally Rocky was meant to die after the fight with Tommy Gunn. The beating that he took from that, it was going to go into like the flashes of his brain damage again, and he was going to collapse in the street and he was going to die in Adrian's arms. And you do get, I think there's footage out there of that. I know that there's stills as well, some photographs where you can see images taken from that scene. So this would have been it. I mean, Stallone this was in his original script, that would have put a full stop at the end of the Rocky legacy, the character. And I think it was the director and the studio, because, they want more of this probably. They didn't like the ending. In hindsight, I'm really glad they didn't end it with that, because could you imagine Rocky going out to a street fight with Tommy Gunn, among anyone against Tommy Gunn, and then that's the end of the Rocky character? Like, no. So I'm glad they didn't do that, but you can see the seeds of it and what it would have been built into. But I don't think that would have done justice to the character to have him die in the street like that. So I'm glad they changed that. And then, like, the final moment of the film, it's a nice sort of bookend on the stairs again with the statue. And then we get a song, and I absolutely love this song, by the way. It's an Elton John song. It's called The Measure of a Man, and it plays during the credits of this film. This film was nominated for so many Razzies all across the board, like performance, cinematography, direction, film, even the song. And I actually found out this, I think it was about a year ago, that the team that wrote this song, so it was Elton John, obviously, who helped write it. And it's actually Alan Menken and Tim Rice, who are famous for doing like all the Disney songs. They were the dream team. They came up with, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, Pocahontas, like all those big 90s Disney film songs. They wrote all those. I love the song. I think it's a beautifully fitting song for the end. The lyrics, they say like back to the start and everything, and it does help bring that
conclusion, what we maybe thought was the conclusion at the time for the Rocky franchise, but we know that it wasn't. And we're going to get to that next time. But if I'm going to give my final thoughts on Rocky 5, it is the weakest one. When I am doing a marathon, it is that one where I go, oh, okay, let's get Rocky 5 out of the way. But there are moments of it I do like. As I mentioned, I do love the character of George Washington Duke. I think he's hilarious. He's brilliant, played perfectly. And I like some of the themes. I think it was bold in that it was trying to do something different. It was trying to break away from what may have been formulaic if they'd have gone on for a third film with the new villain of the week, essentially, after Clubber Lang, Ivan Drago. I do appreciate that. The going back to Philadelphia was bold. How it was handled in the film, maybe under the circumstances, it's not handled great, but I do appreciate that it was trying to go back to more of that drama, more of that familiar territory of the first Rocky film. I just don't think it stuck the landing. I like the themes in it. I just don't think the writing's there. And as you mentioned, the big takeaway from this, Rocky just feels completely out of character in this film. And as the film's called Rocky, and as you follow him, as he is the protagonist, this likable protagonist, one of the greatest hero's journeys in film history in general, it's just really frustrating to see that play out on screen. And so much of that is the runtime, that dynamic with Rocky, his son, and Tommy Gunn, that eats up so much of the runtime. So it's a real mixed bag. I can understand why people view it as the worst one, but I don't think it's by any stretch like damning to the series or ruins the series or anything like that. It's not all that. It's inconsistent. It's inconsistent as hell, but it's not the worst thing ever.
Yeah, my kind of thoughts echo that to a point where I'm quite similar that I think there's ideas in here. It just doesn't have the execution. It didn't have that. Maybe it's an ego type thing, but it just didn't have the ending they obviously wanted. Now, I think the only reason I can happily say this isn't damn the Rocky series is because it's not the last one. I think if this genuinely was, that would have been a real sad way for it to go, because there's nothing worse than the final film in a franchise being poor. Again, time. You get Balboa, you get Creed. That's two sort of nice epilogues for the Rocky character. So it is one of those where, there are some things that do work, some things that don't. Overall, it's obviously not a great film, but if you're going to watch it, you're already invested. As you said, you're not going to probably watch this without having watched the others. You can watch Rocky 1 and Rocky 4 without watching the others, but to me, it's pretty hard to want to put Rocky 2 on without watching Rocky 1 beforehand. The same with Rocky 3. And this is one of them where if you're going to be watching this, it's because you're already invested in that character. You're on the train, you're going through them. So there's no point skipping it because it's not that bad to be skipped. It doesn't completely tear it apart. There are some really good things in there. There are concepts in there that get paid off at later stages. So I can kind of let it have a pass because of that. But ultimately, it is, again, it's more that betrayal of Rocky as a character. But I'm more at the fact that Stallone, granted he did write and direct this, at least in time, he addressed that and fixed that. And that's a really big thing for me. So overall, like I said, if you're not invested in this film by now, in this series by now, then what on earth are you doing watching this? But if you are, I'm curious to know the people's thoughts that do like this, especially with that sort of father-son dynamic.
Yeah, and you mentioned there, just the last thing I'll say, because I forgot about this line. Can't believe I forgot about this line until rewatching this film. This might be my favorite line out of all the Rocky films, or it's certainly the one that caught me off guard the most. You actually have a moment that caught you off guard the most, which I also forgot about, which is the picture that Robert draws of his French teacher. That did kind of catch me off guard. Similar moment, actually. It's where they first get back to the house and Rocky says to Adrian, maybe later I'll take you upstairs and violate you like a parking meter. And then Adrian replies with, oh, yeah, have you got a quarter? Like, I was like, oh, Adrian, damn, like... I don't know. That line just caught me completely off guard because that was just like, oh, I haven't been used to Rocky and Adrian talking to each other like that. I don't know. That just made me laugh, and that's probably gone to like my favorite line in Rocky. But I think that Hennick pretty much echoes our sentiments as well, or certainly yours as well. That's what I mean. It feels too formulaic. Exactly. So I think, it's the shorter one tonight. We knew this was going to be the shortest one, probably. There was still a lot to talk about, though, and dissect with it, but that will do it for our discussion on Rocky 5 next week. Oh, I am not ready for the one next week. Next week we have Rocky Balboa, finishing sort of like the core Rocky saga, I guess, although there are two more. But we want to hear your opinions on Rocky 5. Do you think it's the worst thing ever? Where would you stack it in the rest of the Rocky franchise? And be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe as well. We want to bring as many people into this discussion as possible. We know that Hennick's been the only one to join us tonight. Maybe people saw that we were talking about Rocky 5 and wanted to stay away from it. So hopefully we get some more people in for Balboa, because that is where emotionally it all comes to a head, and we'll have a lot to talk about that as well. But yeah, so like last blast of the socials, if you want to follow us, not just the retro reviews that we do, and the month of December, we have written a schedule.
Yes.
And oh, haven't we just? We have written a schedule and almost daily content. We're going to get to a point. Now, we're not going to give away what all of that content is at the moment. There's a lot of surprises along the way. Obviously, once we wrap up with the Rocky films, we are going to be moving into other retro reviews. But we have a lot of other stuff planned as well for the month. So there's going to be a lot happening. And the best way to stay up to date with all of that is going to be on Facebook. So if you go to Cinema Savvy on Facebook, Twitter is cinema_savvy. And if you'd like to pick up any of our merch, you can go to the TeePublic link in the description down below. And yes, George, if you want to talk about Mandalorian this week.
Absolutely. So Mandalorian's every Friday. We're up to episode... It's going to be episode 6. Sorry. I'm so used to the chapter names. I'm forgetting the actual series names now. So season 2, episode 6, this Friday, chapter 14. We're going to be with you as usual on Friday night, 10 p.m. GMT, 2 p.m. PT, 5 p.m. ET. And if you're joining us from Australia, 9 a.m. over there for you guys waking up early. So that is that. We've got Todd coming on from WSTR Podcast. There's going to be some social media posts over the next couple of days, but we've got another guest on. It'll be me, Chris, and Todd discussing this. It's going to be nice to have someone else in. And we've got him. He's coming in from America this time. So we've had 2 UK people, 2 Australians, an American next. So we've got a couple more collaborations coming. We're looking forward to that. But do check that if you do like your Star Wars, if you do like Mandalorian. And if you haven't already checked out our Chapter 13 video, it is, of course, on our profile. And they are fully spoiler-filled. There is discussions of everything, not just our thoughts on the episode. So do check that out. And as Chris said, December is stacked. We've also got the Mank review coming at some point this weekend, which we're both going to be squeezing in. We won't be watching Citizen Kane though. So I guess we can say it's a new film, right? A new film. It's another Netflix one, but maybe it's a Fincher film. So if do you like films, not just Rockies, and we have a lot of stuff going on too.
Absolutely. So once again, big thank you to Henrik, once again with all the Rocky facts, and thank you for chiming in as well on this discussion. We hope to see you next week for Rocky Balboa if you want to carry on with our Rocky films and finish the series strong. So thank you for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.